Designers and Builders, where design meets construction. We explore groundbreaking trends and talk to the pros reshaping our spaces. For your dream home, workspace, or just great design inspiration, subscribe to Designers and Builders.
Hey, welcome to today's brand new episode of Designers and Builders. I'm your host, Alyssa Olson, and today we're welcoming Steve Duncan, creative design lead at BŌK Modern and a former colleague. How are you today, Steve?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alyssa.
Yeah, great to see you again. We just connected a couple weeks ago, so really stoked to have you again.
So it's good to connect. You know, I feel like time goes by, and before you know it, it's been a few years, but then you just pick it right back up and have a good conversation.
Yeah, and same with us being colleagues. We were together for 3 or 4 years, and
yeah.
We won an art scholarship.
Very recent, but also super long ago.
Yeah,
time's weird right now. Yeah,
time is weird. It's stretchy and not real.
Yes.
Yes, but yeah, let's get started. So you've been the creative design lead. You're a trained architect. You wear many, many hats. Can you tell us about your backstory a bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I decided to be an architect when I was 14, and at the time I didn't know that this current role existed, or I think it's interesting to kind of look back on your intention and then like where do you end up further in your career. And I've bounced around a bit, so I set my sights on architecture and then graduated into the recession in 2011 and got a lighting design job. 4 of us from my class were able to get design jobs. Nobody else got design jobs. None of us got jobs in architecture, which is what I graduated in. So I did lighting design for a while, bounced back to architecture, got into real estate development and home building for a while, did my own business for 3 years, and now I'm a creative design lead here at BŌK Modern, really focusing on metal and strategic ways to kind of optimize this media from a design standpoint. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting arc. And I think if you look at designers, there's always an interesting story there of how did you end up where you did. And I think it just comes down to kind of staying curious. And, as you try things out, that's where you start to realize what's really exciting and interesting to you. Mm-hmm. So there's this challenge of, when you decide a career path, like how do you set your sights on something that you haven't done yet? Right. And so I think it's just important to, you got to try stuff out and not be too rigid about the end destination, right? It's more about the journey and just kind of keeping an open mind along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say that's something that's always stood out about you to me is that you have all these different parts and pieces of experience, and it really enriches the whole of what you're currently working on because you have all these other places in life to pull from.
Right. Yeah. And most of that's just been accidental, right? You leverage what you can, and then you show up in the world as this unique perspective, and then that's what you can bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, it's all about collaboration and finding other people that are curious just like you and getting excitement and momentum around whatever the thing is that you're passionate about at that time.
For sure.
Yeah, I definitely bounce around a fair amount. I'm one of those people that it's a little bit of a shiny object syndrome where, I get excited about something and then, there's a select few things that like really you execute on. But as you know, because like we were obsessed with that hygroscopic analysis when we were at Bethune. That was kind of a fun little chapter to dabble in.
Yeah, it's still a fun chapter for me, actually. I have some
you're still going. Awesome.
Lights, and I should do a little outdoor install, now that it's been rainy season a little bit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and something that in your forms I was reading that struck me is in your first design studio, your professor had quoted Socrates, and the quote was, "There is no solution, seek it lovingly."
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean, right?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Why are you saying that? I had a pretty black and white mindset when I was younger, and kind of more of a type A personality. I think I've kind of mellowed out a little bit as I've gotten older, but at the time I was like, that's what are we even talking about? What a weird thing to say. But I think it's very true. So with design, it's not that there's a singular right answer to something. There's many right answers, and it's kind of up to you to champion your perspective of what you think the right path is, and then get with your team and you kind of wrestle with it, and together you come up with an even better solution. And you have to defend your design vision over and over again, which is something I didn't realize when I was in school. So, there's kind of that initial push of here's the idea. Then you have to, defend it to your colleagues and get buy-in. Kind of, if you're an architect, you need to get your colleagues on board. Then there's kind of the broader team. And you've got GCs and developers and installers. And so there's all of these steps along the way where you have to kind of come back to that North Star of what is it we're trying to do from a design standpoint? What's the design vision? And coalesce excitement and buy-in around that idea. So I think it makes it that much more rewarding when you finally do see the final project built out, because there were so many moments where you or others could have said no and had to let it go or pivot in some way. And, in the end, all of that tension and kind of wrestling and defending the idea is what makes the project the best that it can be, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a really good thing, but it's all that more important that you have a really strong vision for your project, multiple reasons why it's the way to go, or multiple problems that it's solving. Yeah. So I do, oddly enough, you look back on education and it's like, what are the things that stand out? And that one has stood out multiple times. And I wasn't even in architecture school at that point yet. This was like the studio that you take in order to get admitted into architecture school. And it was just a really profound experience, because in that studio, that's where I really started to see the world in a new way and kind of break out of that black and white thinking that I had kind of grown up with. So yeah, education is so important, and really having these mentors and teachers who give so much of themselves to like get these idealistic students up to speed and to kind of question and kind of dismantle your assumptions, right? So that you can be teachable and open,
Yeah.
Did you have anybody like that if you look back on your education experience?
Ooh, that is such a good question. I feel like every professor kind of had their thing that they instilled upon you.
Right.
I can't say there's one that stands out philosophically. And if one of them is listening and I miss their message, I'm going to feel really awful. But I think part of it, and something that I'm hearing from you too, is just that like everyone can be a designer. The process is nonlinear, and it's all about the ideas, right? It doesn't matter where they come from, but really building that.
Yeah. I think it's more of a mindset rather than a title, right? So you're stepping into that mindset at different points, whether you're a GC or an installer or the architect or interior designer. So I think I got into architecture because I love design, and I did want that title. And then I think as I got into my career, I realized how much of the puzzle is actually figured out by others, right? So maybe there's sort of a big idea or organizational framework that the architect comes up with buildings, but then so many players between that moment and walking through and actually touching and using the building that has been built. And particularly for installers, there's a lot of decisions that do have to be made in the field, and you just have to have a design sensibility of what's the best way to do this, what's the design intent from the architect, and there's a little bit of translating that happens, because owners can't afford to pay an architect to design every possible condition, and even if they did, there's going to be surprises in the field and challenges that you have to overcome. And maybe folks are not going to be looking that close at the drawings anyway. So
right.
it kind of depends on the project. Yeah.
And especially, kind of a joke that's not a joke in landscape is like, did you even look at our drawings?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I think that's why it's so important to have these pre-construction meetings and build rapport with the team that's doing most of the work actually with building out the project, and just kind of like, here's what the client's after, here's what our solution is. You're going to encounter things and you're going to have to make a call me, or, if you have to, then, take this conversation and make your best judgment of what to do here. So.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's such a small piece of the puzzle, construction administration, as far as fee, but so important. And it blows my mind when the clients don't want to pay for the construction administration, the implementation of what we all talked about over the last years or months or whatever to
Yeah.
arrive at a buildable design, So
Yeah.
important. And I think it's super fun too. Like, it's so good to just get out of the office and just go talk with folks and get out on site.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I feel like in our time together, that's something that we both loved. Like you were always out on site, coming into the office, grab the
Yeah.
iPad or the drawing set, like whatever tools you needed so you could be out there assisting and observing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hugely fun part of the job. It's just getting out of the office and existing out on the job site. Yeah.
Yeah. And also learning. Like I feel like that's something else. Like you're in that kind of interstitial space of understanding fabrication and realities, but then also translating those back into design.
Yeah. Yeah. It's full circle, right? So one of those great things about design is you can be really zoomed out with your vision, but then you also need to be looking at the detail. And personally, I really like the big idea, but then also the details. And then there's kind of this in-between spot where usually there's some building permit drawings that need to be created and code review and, all of that stuff that needs to happen. But I feel like there's this, there's kind of the magic of the big idea, but also the details, because that's how we interact with design as humans. There's these kind of ergonomic moments of like doorknobs and handles and stairs, and these high touch moments in the design, as opposed to kind of zoomed way out at the macro level. And so that's something that's been really interesting now that I'm working in metal, is sort of there's this story of maybe it's a giant parking garage with a pattern that you can read going 40 miles an hour on the freeway, but then there's maybe these higher touch moments where you're interacting or seeing kind of these hidden symbols or moments or moire patterns within the metal that you can only experience when you slow down a little bit and get a little closer, up close and personal with the design. So there's that really fun duality with working with metal panels.
Yeah. And it's also, I feel like from the designer perspective, that's part of the job, is thinking about all the ways in which you're going to experience this space or this object or the effect of it or the messaging, all these kind of hidden things that are integrated.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of it is your audience, right? Like, who are you talking to in that moment? The conversation with an installer is going to be very different than with an owner or an architect, right? And so you have to be able to switch hats with all these folks, and your North Star of, this is our design approach. It has to work for everybody, right? So I think that's something that's really fun about the job, because in architecture, you're a little bit limited, or your hands are tied. You don't have as much access sometimes to installers and GCs, or, they're not on board yet sometimes. And so it's really nice to kind of be at this intersection of being able to talk about design, but also the folks that are actually going to build this and fabricate this to make reality, your vision a reality.
Yeah, for sure. And I also will say BŌK really stands out to me as a fabricator. Like as someone who worked in the Bay Area for 10 years, they were the go-to. If you can't do truly custom things, it's a very trusted source with beautiful details, constant new patterns, ideas coming out. Like it's just so innovative as a company.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of sells itself in a way, because it makes sense, right? If you're already doing a metal panel or a perforated pattern or something, why would you not also make that structurally more rigid by adding some bends? And then that allows you to remove structural steel from the job and save cost. So, and then also have these very beautiful details, right? So it is a specific look for sure, but it's something that's kind of fresh compared to what's been on the market for the longest time, right? Fencing and sunshades and guardrails and all these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just like inspiring details, beautiful. Like you see them and it's resolved.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with beautiful resolved details, it looks so simple, but actually there's so much thought. Like, it's so much harder to achieve a simple, clean detail with two parts versus multiple systems and multiple trades. And, like, how do you arrive at that elegant solution and still solve all the problems, right? So there's a reason why, some of these systems out there have been the way they have. up until now. So yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I agree. I love the simplicity and the clean details.
Absolutely. So then in terms of materiality, I mean, there's tariffs, there's supply chain issues. Like how is that going for you right now?
Well, there's always a new surprise, right? So I think, again, just going back to an attitude of kind of being curious and open-minded, I think that's what is necessary and has been helpful in navigating this. So what's aluminum going to be this week versus last month? How do we find additional new ways to be even more creative and ways to save costs on projects that have already been designed? So I think it's a fun challenge, and to an extent, it's just part of what you sign up for. I think at this moment, there's a lot more volatility to kind of work with and have to navigate. But again, it goes back to this idea of, what's the design idea and what are we trying, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the goals of the client and the owner and the architects? And then maybe you just reframe your approach slightly and find a way to still meet all those goals, but now meet this increased cost for materials with tariffs and so forth, right? So it's all design, right? That's a piece of the puzzle. It's a very important piece of the puzzle that has to be figured out alongside and concurrently with all these other goals.
Yeah. And do you feel like, I mean, I feel like everyone understands that, right? Like all parties understand what's going on, but how do you navigate those conversations with your collaborators?
Well, I think, by the time you're having this conversation about we were at this cost, now we're at a different cost because of factors in the world, the global economy, you're kind of at this micro perspective. And what you have to do is you have to zoom back out, not be too attached to where you've landed, and just kind of identify, all right, are we going to do a moderate shift in order to achieve, maybe a bigger delta in cost savings? Or is it more tweaking and tuning the design and just being a little strategic about where are those high touch moments and where are other areas where you can kind of value engineer a little bit? So I like to go into every project with some ideas around how could we value engineer this in the future if we needed to. It's always good to kind of have that in your back pocket. And you communicate that up front. Here's where we're at. If we had to, here's what we could do in the future. For now, let's stick with, staying true to the goals and the vision and not compromise, but we know that we have that there. So there's that. I think there's also this aspect of collaborating early on so that you are dialing in and optimizing your design from the beginning. So there's this material cost question on the back end, but also if I'm working with an architect, we want to get in front of them soon enough that they aren't detailing things that are not our system, are not going to be built in an optimal way, right? So we don't want you to waste that time detailing something that's not going to be built. So I think it's really about having a continuity of communication across the project and just kind of staying in touch. For a lot of our projects, it's like a 2 to 3 year timeline, kind of start to finish. So it's kind of this ongoing conversation and just kind of keeping tabs on things. Where's the design at? What's new? What's happening? And just kind of being a co-creator with the design lead to execute their vision. I think that's what's really fun about the job is like, if you have this design vision, then we have this technical know-how of how to execute that. So let's have conversations around it so that you can feel really confident that you can do something a little bit avant-garde, something that you want to get published or get an award for, or, really push your brand as a designer. So if that's what you want to do, then I really recommend reaching out to fabricators and installers and kind of building your team in that way early on so that you can have that confidence. And again, defend that design idea to all of these different stakeholders, right? That are going to have different questions and different perspectives on what it is that you're trying to achieve. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
I'll stop it there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, another question on that. I mean, I know that you all are a very trusted company and brand. Like, do you find that you often have a lot of like the same repeat collaborators?
Yeah, definitely. So I think initially it was, you build a relationship with the architect, and then eventually you get the GCs and the installers on board. And then eventually everybody's kind of recommending it or recommending the approach to other offices that, maybe it's a design firm that has an office across the country. And we have really been based in the Bay Area and California more broadly for the most part. And now we're going national and kind of um, extending that offering across the whole nation. And
Yeah.
so that's really exciting. So we've got a team of sales reps to help us out and really expand those opportunities to have these design charrette conversations. So that's a big part of what I get to do. I get to meet and really talk about design with the architects. And
Mhm.
then we also have internal design discussions around, okay, here's the vision. What do we think about how we should detail this? What are the constraints and the considerations and ways to optimize this design from a cost standpoint and a timing standpoint? So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And is it something, is it kind of going both ways in terms of like you reaching out versus other people reaching out at that national scale?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I will say when folks are reaching out, a lot of it is California.
Mhm.
And so our sales reps, they're already in touch with architects and builders, for various other product lines that they represent. And then if they spot an opportunity where we'd be strategically best positioned for what they're trying to achieve, then that's when they invite us to the conversation because we're bringing kind of this unique perspective on it. So I think it's just as important to kind of say like, oh, great idea. This is really probably somebody else's core to execute this and be, competitive in that way.
Mhm.
Because, sometimes you have to say no in order to be able to say yes, right? So being strategic around what is the best fit
Mm.
for, is this project a good fit? So we do have standard products and kind of a standard approach to things, but a lot of what I work on is the custom projects, the custom canopies, where it's like, this is the vision, and we have a lot of scope on the building where there's fences and guardrails and standard products that we offer. But let's do something really interesting with this canopy moment, or this highly visible architectural feature. And so that's really where I get to work with folks and kind of take the same design approach, but apply it in a really custom and interesting way.
Mhm. That's very cool. I'm not surprised that that's your specialty at this moment.
Yeah, I'm very happy about it. It's a dream job. It's every day is a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any projects in particular right now that you're really excited about working on?
Oh yeah, I mean multiple ones. I feel like once a week we get a really cool, high profile project that hits the queue. I can't get into specifics of any of those, but I'll keep you in touch once they get published.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And I guess, now that you're more on the fabrication side, like I know you had mentioned before you felt very black and white in your
Yeah.
thinking. Are there other things that have kind of like challenged thoughts or design processes that you've had in the past from the architect side?
Ooh, good question. I think there's some similarities. So I think when you're in the architect role, you have to deal with a lot of folks who are specialized at the piece of the puzzle that they're good at. And so there is still a bit of that, even on the fabrication side. So I have this like deep understanding of this specific piece of the puzzle, but there's still skepticism. You have to educate and get folks up to speed from an install standpoint. Everybody is good at their piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
And I think I thought that moving from architecture over to the fabrication side, that some of that would go away, and that was not the case. That was not the case. So it's still just everybody has their thing that they're really good at and their lens that they're viewing the project through, and so it's just important to stay curious and open so that you continue to learn and understand their perspective of why was that their initial reaction, or what is their concern. And so that's part of this full circle of kind of making your products and your designs better over time, right? So just being open and listening and very curious, it's a big piece of the puzzle. Listen
Yeah.
more than talk.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the ratio, right? Two ears, one mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's so funny. I keep hearing that from people, like the importance of listening. And I feel like Mithun really drilled that into us too. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, every time you talk to a client, here's what we heard. This is how we interpreted it. This is what we're doing, and just kind of
Yeah.
like building that way in the design process.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of architecture firms don't necessarily take that approach. And that's something I really liked about Mithun was, we're listening. It's very client driven as opposed to, coming at it of like, here's my big idea and I have an ego around this and, you will do it and I'll convince you, which never would have worked for me. Right. So I really like Mithun's approach in that way of, listening to the stakeholders and then collaboratively within the firm coming up with the best design solutions and stress testing those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And I guess, are there other things that you see in the design field that could be improved?
It's a really broad question. Broad. I think I've definitely been mulling over AI. And so there's this opportunity of becoming more efficient with processes and tools. And I think it's something that you could have some fear around with AI, but I view it more as like, how can you be more competitive? How can you become more efficient? How can it make your life better and make the design better? Because you're viewing it as a tool. There is a lot of kind of trudgery work in design. Most of it's not glamorous, right? So there's the big idea and the rendering and the vision and the public discourse, but then there's, detailing guardrails for your permit set and your schedules and things like that, which are just as important, but maybe it's a little quieter. So I think it's within our capacity to look at, what are the pieces of my job that I would love to automate or build a tool around and then just view AI in that way. But I do kind of come back to with design and construction, there's always this communication aspect and sort of passing the baton in some way of the idea. It's almost like an assembly line of here's the big idea and eventually it reaches you. And so there's all these handoff moments, the architect's handing off the drawing set to the GC, and the installers. There's all of these moments along the way where communication happens and hopefully the message is not lost in translation, right? So I feel like there's probably some opportunity there, definitely, to just make things simpler. Over time, systems just inherently become more complex. If you think of like permit approvals or, there kind of has to be these periods where you come back and say, how can we make this simpler? And part of that is getting all of the stakeholders into a conversation sooner so that you don't kind of veer off in a wrong direction. But there's also optimal sizes for conversations and decisions, right? So I feel like a 2 or 3 person conversation, you can get a lot done. And then, a 10 or 20 person, what are you doing? You're basically just trying to cover yourself and make sure everybody's input was taken into consideration. But it can really slow things down as an organization. How do you stay lean with meetings and efficient so you can really be working on the work and not just showing up to meetings? So yeah, documenting design decisions or I think really looking at process is important. And there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's there's so many thoughts, and which also just reflects how complicated and involved the design process can be. But at the end of the day, it can also be very simple. Like how can we eliminate these busy or more admin heavy tasks so that we can really focus on design and the things that we've been really trained to do and to think about.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, and then also your point about meeting size, decision making. I think a question back to you is I don't feel like in my design education that the importance of communication and building relationships, like I feel like it's just like taken for granted. It's like, oh, you'll just figure it out when you get there. And then you have
it's a given, right?
Yeah. But it's not. And I'm curious, do you feel like do you feel like communication was a natural strength for you, or you've just learned as you've gone?
I think I probably thought that and then got thrown into a couple of multidisciplinary studios and realized I don't have it figured out, So University of Washington was where I went to grad school, and we had a summer abroad to Copenhagen and came back into the studio. And so we had urban planners and landscape architects and architects. And I think that was one of the first big realizations of like, wow, we're really looking at this from a very different perspective, each of us. That communication can be tricky even amongst designers, right? So I think I realized the importance of telling a story visually. Really, when I have these design charrette conversations with architects and landscape architects, I really like to have a visual behind what I'm talking about. And I'm much more, less driven by the text side of things and kind of verbally describing things. I feel like, picture's worth 1,000 words, right? But that's especially true with design or with a sketch, right? I think that was a realization. And I think once I got into my career and started presenting to design review boards and community groups, you realize you have to be even more careful about the words you say or the visuals that you share, just because you may be trying to tell the story in this image supports it over here, but then they're gravitating to this thing over here that's the wrong color, and they just can't get off of that, right?
Yeah.
It's up to us to do everybody a favor and try to like curate that a little bit better around the messaging, because it can be hard to once you've lost someone, it can be really hard to get them to come back. That's up to them to be really curious and open-minded. So there's a lot of strategy around that, definitely. And I think from a communication standpoint, just trying to have empathy and put the cap on of whoever it is you're talking to. What is their perspective on what you're saying, and try to keep it short and sweet and limit the story to that piece of the narrative that they need to understand. And it's all part of the same big idea, but you're helping them out by not making them do the editing and parsing through of what it is that you're saying.
Yeah. It's that really stands out to me, especially in those community meetings, is how to curate things and try to strategize, like an innocuous thing like color, could actually be really impactful to someone versus another.
Yeah.
And so how you kind of corral the conversation. Like, I'll never forget with the Capuso project at the Balboa BART station.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the BART Plaza, eventually the childcare, and going to one of the initial meetings, the community reaction was, this building has no parking. Again, it's at a multimodal transit hub in the city that's been that way for years, decades, since people were traveling through the site hundreds of years ago. It's always been this hub. And that became the focus. And the leader of Mission Housing paused and he said, this is about making bedrooms for people to live in. This is not about parking spaces. And it quieted the room and just reshifted the focus on, hey, we're building housing because we have an extreme need.
Yes.
And let's just focus on that, and you'll figure out where to park your car. Like, or maybe you won't even need it, but it's just like, kind of redirecting traffic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. When I lived in Seattle, I lived in a micro housing unit for a short while. Okay. And there was no parking for that. And I remember I got surveyed, I think it was 3 times over the course of a year. Just, they were asking us, did we park? Did we drive? Did we have a car? And I didn't have a car, and I was able to walk to work and it was fine. But it was just sort of this like deep skepticism around how can this work? And I think when you look at housing, it's not that every housing unit that's offered needs to be the same and meet your needs at your stage in life, right? It's more about having a diversity of options depending on the season of life that you're in, because that can be different. Are you a young single adult? Are you a college student? Are you a parent that has a couple kids and strollers and need to have a vehicle to get around? Mm-hmm. And so I think that obviously can be tough because a community is going to see that through the lens of their lived experience, right? But even if you look at yourself, at different points in your life, what was your relationship with vehicles? Did you need it? Were you in a dense city, or are you living in a rural area? I think you've got to shop, right? Like, it all weighs in on vehicle needs, right? So.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
makes projects so expensive, right? So
it really does.
yeah, it's kind of, I think a lot of people don't realize, surface parking versus parking garages and subterranean parking, the cost difference per stall for these things is just astronomical.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just all about choice and having a diversity of options available.
Yeah, for sure. And I think being creative about it with either dollars or spatially or people with their lives, just like figuring out how to adapt as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So another question, are there trends that you've been seeing either in business or design? And trends that you either are into or would rather never see again?
Well, I think something that I have started to see is that there's a craving or a desire to get back to having some level of ornament in design. This is a modern company. We do very clean detailing, but I think there's this interesting idea of how do you add back in texture or have a nod to historical architecture if you're going to do like an adaptive reuse or an addition to a project. How can you be reverential to that without literally copying it? And so that's a common theme in design, right? What has come before, and then what are we inspired by and putting forth for new construction? But I think that's something I've been really fascinated by. At the beginning of my career, I was definitely a little bit more minimalist. And now I'm really interested in how do you still have a clean detail, but have some ornamentation and texture. Maybe it's a little bit of like a nod to Art Deco or
Mm.
Victorian or, something. So like, how is that reinterpreted in a new, more modern way of installing?
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I feel like there's also a lot of like cultural relevance, nods to history, like there's a lot of reason to use it or even cool shadow patterns, like ways that you can
Oh,
engage
yeah.
people spatially and also societally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned shadow. So light and shadow is such a big piece of the puzzle with, pattern and perforation.
Mhm.
Lately, I've been really looking into like the scientific research around like stress and healing environments and dappled light. There's kind of this layer of biophilia with pattern.
Mm.
And so that's something really fun that we get to play with.
Yeah, that's so cool. How much of your work do you get to just like experiment and play with design?
Good question. I would say it's probably more than when I was in the architect role. Say
Okay,
maybe like a quarter of the time. Like it's pretty good.
that's quite good.
Most of the conversations are really project specific with an
Mhm.
architect or a landscape architect.
Okay.
But you also have to come up with new processes and new design ideas and new products. So that's also a fun piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And do you feel like you have a smooth process for that?
I mean, I think it's smooth-ish only because I am not just starting as a designer, right? So I think it's less about team or projects. It's more about just like over the course of your career, you get better at understanding your design process. So I've come to recognize that as I'm thinking about an idea, I really have to hand sketch it first just to kind of get the ideas fleshed out before I get into any kind of a modeling software, just because that can kind of sap the energy from it, or it can take a lot of time to execute that. Revit in particular. So lately, I've been working a lot more in SketchUp, which is a little bit more fluid, but certainly planar, versus something like Grasshopper or Rhino, which is a little bit more curvy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a realization that I've come to, is that it's really important to do that. And then also from an efficiency and time standpoint, sometimes I just don't have time to fully, render something or, model it. And so a sketch plus an inspiration image can be just as effective as a fully modeled, catered to your project solution.
Yeah. And what about sketch models? Are you making things?
Mostly it's digital at this point, but I do think because so much of it is about folding, there's sort of this origami aspect to it. So I think that's something fun to study. And then, You also just have to get out to the fabrication shops and look at the brake metal machines and how they're set up and what the limitations are with how many bends and what the angles are with that. So yeah, there's the concept and there's reality. There's always this marriage between the two that you have to walk that line. So that's the fun.
Yeah. And what about the educational component in that? Because I feel like there's the translation between what's materially possible and a design intent. Like they might not always merge in a seamless way. Like, is that part of your conversations? Is that part of your internal team structure?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a huge piece of it. And I think in my role, it's really, I'm there to push us and to think a little bigger and think, like, okay, yes, we can solve this problem this way, and we have solved it this way for years. But why? Why is that? What problem, what led us to this place? And then questioning and understanding. So there's kind of that tension internally of figuring that out. But then also, I think when you educate designers, they really appreciate that context as well, because if you're looking at a project, it's kind of like a puzzle. And if you're armed with the information, then it's kind of like, okay, challenge accepted. I get it. These are the constraints. This is how I can optimize my design to be cost effective if I'm working with BŌK. And, now I understand and can kind of reconfigure my design in that way. So I think that's when you're in that architect role, that's one of the great things about being an architect is it's sort of like, all right, what are the constraints? And then how do I bring all of these things together in a unified way that clicks and makes sense? And in order to do that, there's this education piece, right? So you have to understand the constraints of what you're working with. So yeah, I think architects are always very receptive to that, and they love hearing about the why, because it goes back to being curious.
Yeah, for sure. And it also deeply informs the creative process, right? Like when you have constraints, you have to figure out how to work with them.
Yeah. And I think it's easier to design when you have constraints, and I don't know if that was something that they taught you in school, but it was definitely, I absolutely agree with that. It's sometimes the more constraints, the more easy the solution is. Because there's fewer avenues to go down. You're kind of like hemmed into a certain direction, and then you can really focus on optimizing that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the concept of a tabula rasa came up a lot, especially in landscape.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't believe that to be true, period. Like there's always something, and you have to look for it or listen for it. But it becomes that design driver, and it becomes something to react to in the process.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess looking forward, are there in the next 5 or 10 years, like how do you see the field looking in either in your specific role or through architecture or kind of all of the above?
I think we're going to see some collapsing of silos. So the industry is maybe a little bit siloed right now, and I think we're going to see more design build or architects working directly with fabricators or just kind of bringing teams together, maybe under one roof, or maybe there's a structure where there's sort of this loose organization around, per project where you're just building this very strategic team. Folks that were maybe not talking to each other as much before, I think are going to be. I think kind of the production side of creating drawings is going to become easier. So it's going to be much more about technical understanding meets design vision meets financing, just sort of collapsing these handoff moments. So I think it'll be a little bit more concurrent with the design approach as opposed to kind of a passing of the baton that we have seen maybe in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I feel like the design build route has become more of a norm on certain project typologies, like campus work in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it seems like it's translating into housing and other portions of the field.
Yeah.
And and it seems like you're very well equipped because you're on all sides of the equation. You're at a company that naturally collaborates across.
Yeah, it's great to have access. Yeah, access to the full team.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, yeah, Steve, I mean, given your experience, your accomplishments, what advice would you have to others or a younger version of you?
Well, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think just staying curious and not too attached to a specific outcome in your career. Because I think if you can be open-minded and see, stay curious, and you see those opportunities along the way, and you might discover something that you really love that was maybe not what you set out to do initially, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that'd be my advice. Stay curious.
Okay, I love that. Well, thank you